primary season is finally over. So you know what that means? That means we get to do nothing until July or even until November in some cases. No, no, that's not the case at all. Now that primary season is over in our lovely state of Illinois, we now begin the new season of slating season. As is common in every election cycle, there are races in which no candidate ran in the primary, or the candidate who ran the primary will not be able to be on the November election for one reason or another. With me today is Core Strategy's downstate political expert and future king of Southern Illinois, Michael Butler, to take us through the slating process. Michael, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Glad to be here.
Well, Butler, I know I've been getting a lot of phone calls in the last, few weeks regarding the slating process because it seems like a lot of people are interested in either running in the upcoming November election or there might be vacancies caused by people dropping out of the race. So, can you take us through the beginning of this process in terms of slating candidates?
So the first step in the slating process is establishing a slating committee. You're required by state law to have a chairman of that committee and a secretary of that committee. There can be additional committee members if you have other people that are interested kind of in the process and ensuring that a candidate appears on the ballot. But the first step is designating that chairman and the secretary, because those two individuals will be the ones that sign off on this candidate being the candidate for the Republican Party within that county or within that district. It's a little unique in comparison to the standard petition process, because obviously in the standard process, you may have multiple candidates running, and then the voters ultimately will decide in the primary who will be on the ballot in November. But in this instance, there's not an opportunity for that to happen. So the slated candidate is the candidate that has the blessing of those county organizations and precinct committeemen within that district to be our candidate as the Republican Party.
Now, is there any limitation for who can appear as chairman and secretary of a slating committee, or is it basically up to whoever is determined?
It either needs to be like like chairman or organization leaders that have jurisdiction in that district, or it can also be like a voter or a precinct committeeman or something of that nature. It's whoever the chairman that oversee that process in general choose.
Now, once you have formed your slating committee, what's the next step in moving along the process for slating somebody? Because I know that the law stipulates that this is a pretty public process here. Gone are the days of doing a lot of things behind closed doors. So, what's the next step after you form your committee?
So the committee will want to notify the precinct committeemen that are in that jurisdiction that the committee has been established and that the slating process has begun. So you'll want to do that, via email. In some instances, if it's a more high-profile slating process, like for a state rep race or something of that nature, you'll probably also want to send something in the mail, notifying the precinct committeemen within that jurisdiction that this process is being undertaken. And obviously, one of the things that you would like to do is request. You want to request input from those precinct committeemen. Maybe one of them is interested in running. Maybe they have people in mind that they think would be solid candidates. Because one of the big responsibilities of the slating committee is to seek and vet candidates for the position. So they're going to want to, have as much information as they can get their hands on so they can make an educated decision on who the best person is for this.
Excellent. After precinct committeemen have been notified of, the slating process, what's the timeline looking like for actually setting up the meeting? Because you can't do this in private. So you have to set up something, an actual meeting place. What does that process look like?
So there's not like a specific requirement on, note on like the notification process. There's not like a specific amount of days or anything like that. But you want to give, you just got to make sure that you're being reasonable. Sometimes we're on constricted timelines and maybe you don't have, a week, but I would say like around a week notice is reasonable, and makes sense. So you want to, set a date, where you make where the slating becomes official. And one of the requirements is that the slating meeting must be held within the district, that the candidate is being slated for. So if you're, running countywide, it can be anywhere in the county. But if you're slating somebody for like a county board district or a state rep district or something of that nature, where there's, more compact boundaries, you've got to make sure that you're doing it within that. So that may mean like in a county board district, you may do it at a restaurant. You may do it at the, rent a slot at the township building. Maybe you do it at somebody's home. Maybe you do it at McDonald's. But the requirement is you have to do it within the district, that you're slating for.
Now, the speakers on this particular show would probably recommend you not do your slating meeting at a McDonald's. You probably should use a more classy building. I'm not saying McDonald's isn't classy. As you can tell, I myself enjoy my McDoubles. However, I think it would be better that you use a government office like a township building. If you have a GOP office in that specific district, the library is always a great place for doing meetings. So if you're doing a slating meeting, try and have it be someplace that actually, is aesthetically pleasing for a slating meeting. Don't just do it any old willy-nilly place, because the Democrats or anybody will make fun of you if you do it at a McDonald's. They will. So you have your meeting. You're having it at the First Baptist Church of O'Fallon or wherever you're having this meeting. The meeting what happens at this meeting? We got everybody in the room. We got the candidates who are going for it, or candidate. We got the PCs there, the volunteers. What's the process for the meeting itself?
So it kind of depends on your situation in a sense. If you only have one candidate that express interest and you've got that person locked in, you intend to slate that person, that is a pretty simple process. There's a resolution that has to be filled out and then signed by the chairman and the secretary of the slating committee, and that has to be notarized. If you have multiple people that are interested in the position, then you have to take a vote of the precinct committeemen within that district, and they vote based on their weighted vote. So it's however many Republican primary ballots were cast in their precinct during the primary election. So that's an important distinction. If you do have multiple candidates, then that's where the weighted vote comes in, and that has to be cast.
Now, it's not always precinct committeemen.
Right.
Sometimes, especially in Cook County, where I'm from, in Cook County specifically, it goes to township committee. Or if you've got overlapping districts, maybe you have a legislative district, which is, Cook County and Will County. This is something we just dealt with this last week. It goes to the township committeeman in Cook County and the county chairman in Will County or any of the other collar counties. So this can get a little bit tricky. But the key thing is that you're dealing with township committeemen, county chairman, sometimes precinct committeemen down by Butler in those cases, but it's based on the ballots cast in that primary. It's not based on the amount of people who voted in a specific district the last time. It's not based on how many Republican primary voters actually voted for people in that district last time. It's based on the amount of ballots cast. There might have been people in a district who pulled a ballot or Republican ballot, looked that there was nobody to vote for on that ballot, and left the entire thing blank. Their vote still counts. That ballot still counts towards going to the weighted vote totals. The best way to get these totals is to go to your local election authority. Some of them have them already, on the website for you. where you can literally just look up ballots cast, and it'll tell you exactly how many ballots cast for a certain district. Some election authorities don't make this easy, so you kind of have to. You might have to call the state board of elections. You might have to FOIA request them from the county. But however you get this done, make sure you're getting the most accurate totals possible, because the last thing you want is there to be an issue when there's perhaps a contested slating that you don't have the most accurate data in terms of ballots cast. So, Michael, I guess my next question is, when you're dealing with precinct committeeman votes, especially down by you or in relation to county board districts as opposed to legislative districts, what if you're dealing with a county board district with split precincts? We got, O'Fallon precinct 4 happens to be in county board district 4 and 5. I'm making these numbers up. How do you deal with split precincts in these cases?
So, like, if you have a precinct that is split between multiple jurisdictions, like a county board district, for example, the weighted vote for that precinct is the number of Republican ballots cast in the portion of that precinct where that county board district would be on the ballot. So, for example, like I had 73 weighted votes in my precinct, but because my precinct is divided, if I was voting on slating a county board candidate or something of that nature, maybe my weighted vote would only be 40 out of the 73, because, the other 33 votes may have been in a different county board district. So whenever you get into these districts that are extremely gerrymandered, whether it's county board or state rep or state senate or even Congress, that's something that you're going to have to look into. You can't just take the weighted vote from your precinct and say, okay, this is how many votes I get. So that's why it's really important that if you have a contested slating process, that you contact the county clerk's office and ask them for the weighted vote by precinct within that district, because you don't want to have more votes, in that process than you were actually allowed to have.
So now we've figured out the ballots cast. We have the votes. We have John Doe nominated for County Board District 7 in St. Clair County. What's the next step on the agenda for the committee to do at this point?
So after you've picked your candidate, you have approval from the appropriate, the chairman, the precinct committeemen, the township committee persons, whatever the makeup of that vote is. Once that is finalized, then you sign the resolution. So the chairman and the secretary of the slating committee sign off on a resolution authorizing this individual as the candidate for the Republican Party in that district. That resolution must be notarized. And then as soon as the resolution is notarized, that kicks off the signature circulation process. So the sooner you can slate a candidate, the better, the more time you're going to have to get those petition signatures. In some cases, it's not as difficult to get those signatures. If you're running for county board, it may be a small number, but in a county-wide race or state rep or state senate, time is of the essence, and you want as much time on the clock as you can get. So that's why it's important to go through this process in an expeditious manner. And those petition signatures for this cycle would be due on June 3rd. So obviously, as you're watching this video, June 3rd is right around the corner. And if you've got a race where there's a high signature requirement, you're going to want to have that candidate slated sooner rather than later. That way you're not, stressing out and trying to figure out how to get signatures at the last minute.
Now, Michael, my understanding is that there's some stipulations for signature gathering in the slating period. Now, typically in a petition period, really the only thing you're looking for is registered voters to go on your petition and somebody who didn't sign a petition of the opposite party. That's really what you're looking for here. The signature requirements are still the same from the primary petition to the slating petition, but I believe there are some stipulations over who can sign a slating petition.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's unique about this slating process is if you voted in the if an individual or a voter voted in the Republican primary in March, they can sign the petition for a candidate that's being slated by the Republican Party. If they did not vote in the primary at all, Democrat or Republican, they can sign the petition to slate a candidate for the Republican Party. The one part that's like a kind of a red flag and something that you need to keep an eye on is if somebody voted in the Democrat primary in March, they are not a qualified signer for a candidate that is being slated by the Republican Party or vice versa. So if somebody voted in that Democrat primary and they sign a petition for a Republican candidate that is being slated, that signature is not valid. So you want to make sure that you have a buffer and that you have, a significant number more signatures than what the requirement is. Typically we suggest at least 2 times the signature requirement. But in this instance, you really want to keep an eye on that and make sure that you don't have Democrat primary voters signing a petition for a Republican candidate that is being slated, because those signatures will not be valid.
So my recommendation from the field perspective is some people like to do, they only knock on the doors of those people who already voted in the 2024 Republican primary. That's fine. My only stipulation will be that there will be less voters than you will be able to hit otherwise. So my recommendation is, if you're pulling ballots, just make sure you're pulling Republican ballots or just pure independent ballots, and making sure you're double checking every door. You did not vote. Did you vote in the Democratic primary? No, I did not. Okay, you can sign. Because the last thing you want is to have half your petitions just be full of Democratic primary voters, and that way, then you're never going to make it on the ballot in this case.
Absolutely.
Now, Michael, when it comes to petition makeup, because this isn't the same, legalese going into a primary petition. Now that we're slating for a general election, there's a certain way that petitions have to be done and have to be worded. So can you take us through that process of creating a slating petition and what goes into that?
Yeah, so you can contact us here at Core Strategies. We'll be able to provide you with those petition forms. You can also contact your county clerk or the State Board of Elections, and they will be able to provide you those as a PDF. So you're going to want to do that. The first of all, there's a resolution aspect of that. That is unique to the slating process. So you have to have the resolution. It has language that's required by state statute. So you want to pull that. It's fill in the blank. It's relatively simple. But you also want to make sure that you're running that by an attorney or somebody that's experienced with this, to make sure that you have everything filled out appropriately. Then in addition to that, you have your statement of candidacy and your petition and loyalty oath. All 4 of those go together to make up your packet when you file.
So, Michael, there's also a distinction on petitions regarding the difference between failure to nominate and a vacancy in nomination. Can you kind of walk us through those differences and how important it is to get these things right when you're going into petitions?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 distinct forms that are used during the slating process. The more common petition form is failure to nominate. So you use the failure to nominate forms whenever there was not a candidate on the ballot in the March primary. So nobody filed to run for that, or somebody filed and they were kicked off the ballot. That's when you use failure to nominate. The other form that is used in this process is the vacancy and nomination. So you use the vacancy and nomination form when there was a candidate on the ballot in the March primary, but something happened to where that candidate is no longer a candidate for that office. Maybe they passed away, maybe they had health complications, or something happened in their family where they didn't feel comfortable continuing their campaign and they withdrew. So that's critical, because if you use the wrong forms, then your candidate is dead on arrival. That they will ultimately, if somebody challenges, they would be kicked off the ballot if you use the wrong one. So like I said, there's two forms here. There's vacancy and nomination, which is used when the candidate withdraws or passes away or something of that nature, that was previously on the ballot and was supposed to, intended to be on the ballot in the November election. And then there was also failure to nominate, which is when there was not a candidate that filed to run in the primary, or maybe that candidate got kicked off the ballot. So you got to make sure that you're using the appropriate forms here.
And always make sure you're double checking, communicate amongst other organizations, county parties, hire attorneys. There are some great election attorneys out there. If it's a really important race, you want to make sure everything you get everything right. Or they're your wonderful friends at Core Strategies or other organizations which are able to help through the slating process. Illinois Policy Institute specifically has been a great help in the legislative slating process. So if you're slating for legislature, they're a great resource. But make sure you're always communicating. Make sure you're double checking all your stuff, because the last thing you want to do is to get all your petitions, go through this entire slating process, and then you go and actually file the petitions and you're kicked off the ballot the next day because you used the wrong form. So, Michael, to conclude this talk, are there any final tips you'd like to give our viewers regarding the slating process going into it?
So first, you want to keep a close eye on those forms. The header at the top will say either, failure to nominate, vacancy and nomination, and then also it's at the bottom of your petition form. So keep a close eye on that. Make sure that you're using the appropriate forms. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on Democrat primary voters and ensuring that you don't have somebody that voted in the Democrat primary signing your petition, because that signature will not be valid. Whenever you put together your packet, you need to make sure that the resolution, loyalty oath, statement of candidacy, and your petitions are all included. That resolution is critical. That's what establishes you as the official candidate for the Republican Party in that region, and authorizes you to circulate those petitions. And also, statement of economic interest is still required here. So make sure that you get that statement of economic interest form from your county clerk's office and submit that as well. So it's a complicated process. So it's slightly more complicated than it is for the regular circulation period. And you also have a very truncated amount of time. This cycle, June 3rd, is the deadline to turn in those petitions. So if you're intending to slate a candidate for an office, like yesterday kind of is the time to start, because you want, as much time on the clock to get those signatures as possible, especially in some of these higher profile races where the signature requirements are higher.
So my final tips and tricks for slating period is make sure, I understand we want to get a lot of candidates on the ballot for November election. We want to make sure that people have a voice this November, but always make sure you're vetting candidates. If somebody comes to you and says, I want to run for state representative, and it's a really, Democratic district, even if it is a really Democratic district, we want to make sure we have good people in these positions to benefit whatever political party you might be a part of. Make sure they're good candidates for the betterment of this state. In addition, for the petition process itself, don't think of it as any more complicated than the primary petitions. Go out there and do everything. Knock on your doors. Do your events. Have petition parties to get people on the ballot. These are great, easy ways to get signatures. And try to avoid doing this at the last possible minute, because the last thing you want is your precinct committeemen and your precinct captains. They spent their entire season getting people on the ballot, and oops, by the way, you forgot to slate someone, and we're doing it with 5 days until June 3rd. Don't put them in that position. Get your slating done now. Get your petitions done now, so we can have some time before the November election to rest up a little bit and to make sure your precinct committeemen and captains are high on the political process this time around. Well, that concludes it for us over here at Core Strategies. Chris Jackowiak, Michael Butler. Thank you all for tuning in, and best of luck with this petition process, and God bless.